usually Facebook's performing significantly better than people realize it's performing. So if they can get to the point where they understand attribution better, it is still the best one and the most mature and the most stable of all of the ones that you're looking at for that. Google Ads is by far the best for capturing existing demand. So those two, if you're only going to do two, those are still the ones that we 100% recommend.
Welcome to the Heroes of E-commerce podcast, hosted by Russell Miller of Ryzeo. On this show, we speak to e-commerce business owners and leaders, the unsung heroes taking their industry by storm. Tune in as we share success stories and discuss e-commerce ideas to take your business to the next level. So let's dive in.
So I am Russell Miller, GM of Ryzeo, and this is Heroes of Ecommerce. And with us today, we have William Harris, who is head of the Elumynt agency out of Minnesota. Very excited to have William with us today. His agency is a master of advertising, particularly for e-commerce. And so we are going to provide you a lot of value this time in learning about what you can do, in advertising, especially as we record this. We're in November, and so Black Friday is coming up, so that's very exciting too. So let's start off with an easy one. William, maybe you can just give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you guys do at Elumynt.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. I'm excited to be here. I am the CEO of Elumynt, and we are a rapid growth e-commerce agency. We've helped 13 of our clients get acquired. Many of those were for upwards of 50 million. The largest one sold for about 800 million. So we're not messing around. We were just ranked as the 12th fastest growing agency in the world by Adweek. And Google hand selected us as one of only a couple dozen agencies for their IGAP program, for their international growth agency program. And I guess the biggest way that we accomplished most of that would just be through advertising. So Meta, Facebook, Google, TikTok, Reddit. We've developed a series of systems for optimizing ads around EBITDA profit instead of ROAS or other metrics that we just don't think matter.
Now that's a really interesting one because, I think we'll get into this a little bit, but it sort of caught my eye as I was kind of doing the show prep that you're focused on profit, which is something I think most e-commerce stores really kind of like viscerally get, instead of ROAS, which and maybe you should actually explain what that is because all of our listeners may not know.
Sure. So EBITDA is very much like a tax accounting thing for earnings before interest, deductions, taxes, deductions, amortization. And then ROAS is return on ad spend. And the way that those have been typically defined, if you think about ROAS, return on ad spend, is a beautiful sounding metric. It's literally the return. It's like ROI, but it's the return on your ad spend. And I think the biggest issue that we ran into with this is that it has always been a misnomer. It is not. It's never been appropriately named. It is the reported return on your ad spend. Now, if you go back to before the iOS 14 issues, oftentimes platforms would take credit for more than what they incrementally technically drove, right? And so a lot of people were just like, "Oh, I don't believe what Facebook's telling me because I think that it's taking way too much credit for stuff than what it's really driving." So it was a ROAS, but it wasn't a ROAS that you could believe. It wasn't the actual return on your ad spend. It's just the reported. Well, then iOS 14 crushed it the other way to where it's like not reporting as much revenue as maybe what it could take credit for. And so it's still not actually the return on ad spend. And so I think calling it return on ad spend is just, it confuses people into maybe thinking that it is something that it isn't. Whereas profit, EBITDA, this is a fact that you can arrive to with your CPA. Your CPA is going to know for sure whether or not you actually hit this number. And I think when we think about what we're doing as a business is customers don't pay us out of their revenue. They don't pay us out of their ROAS. They pay us out of their profit, out of their EBITDA. And if that's not there, then we, did something wrong. And there's a lot of times where I have seen you can increase your ROAS without increasing your profit. You can actually lower your profit. And it seems maybe counterintuitive, but without going too deep into it, at this point in time, let's just say that it's very easy to increase one without actually increasing the other.
And so by focusing on profit, you're helping them focus on the bottom line thing that, really matters to them.
This is ultimately what matters to the company. And sometimes one of the things that we've found is there's maybe a lack of communication oftentimes between the finance teams and marketing teams. And so for lack of a better idea, let's call it marketing instead of smarketing, right? Finance marketing. But a lot of times the marketing team, even themselves, are not even aware of maybe what the EBITDA was or what profit was, because maybe they're an employee, and so the P&L isn't being shared out to every single person in the company. And so they're operating around their own set of assumptions and guidelines and rules too. And what happens is, and this is, we've run into this, there was a customer, we increased their EBITDA by a massive amount, and I'll get to the number here in a second. First month that we took them on, and they, basically we ended up charging, I want to say it was, a little bit more than what they were used to, double what they were used to paying the previous agency. And let's just say for numbers sake, it was like they were used to paying $10,000 a month and they paid us $20,000 that month. And their marketing person, is only aware of the cost. He's only seeing this and saying, wait a minute, wow, that's a lot more than we're used to paying. Like, I'm going to get in trouble for this. And I said, well, wait a minute. Let's look at what happened. When we subtract your COGS, when we subtract your overhead, we subtract your ad spend, we subtract the agency fee, we subtract out, you guys made $800,000 more profit in a single month. Was it worth paying $10,000 to the agency to go ahead and do that? And they're like, well, yeah, when you put it that way, yeah, I guess it is. And so by getting the finance teams and the marketing teams aligned, we found that it allows everybody to be a little bit more on the same targets.
That is huge, and you're probably doing sort of a big service for the management by kind of bringing those two silos together to sort of see a full picture. Because often those are just totally separate, and they never really talk.
Almost don't want to talk.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's probably true. So we are going into high season right now for most consumer-focused e-commerce businesses. I know that a lot of our customers out there either work with smaller agencies or, have someone internally and try to manage them themselves. There's probably like a real spectrum. What are some common ad mistakes you see e-commerce companies making?
Yeah. Okay. So right now, and this is especially important because of, I think, everything that we see going on with the recession, that we're not quite allowed to call it a recession yet, whatever we want to call this, but like the impending ness that we have, where from an advertising perspective too, making sure that we're aware, Facebook's down a little bit, Google's down, Microsoft's down, like all the digital platforms for the most part are seeing some decline there. Shopify, right, laid people off.
So you mean in traffic or decline how?
In ad spend, especially around this, which is where I'd say, like, if we're talking about looking at from even their stock price of investors and everything too. So which is why a lot of them they're laying people off and things like that. So this is a very real thing that we have to be aware of. So you have to spend each dollar as intelligently as you can. And I think one of there's two common ad mistakes that I see right now that I think are absolutely destroying some companies. The first one is going to be a poor understanding of which ad channels are actually performing. And what happened is I see there's too much focus on the creative, which is important. And so I don't want to say that it's not. It's still very important and can make a big difference. But I think that there's maybe not enough intellectual discussion about the actual analytics and the algorithms that are going on here. And it's not to say that people aren't talking about attribution. They are, but I feel like they're talking about it a little bit out of their butts, like Ace Ventura. I don't know if you remember the Ace Ventura part where he kind of like bends over. He's like, "Excuse me, I'd like to ask you a question," right? And he's
right.
That's kind of what I feel like is happening here, because attribution was a problem before iOS 14. It was after iOS 14 as well. You used to take too much credit. And so,
we've heard that mentioned several times, and I'm aware of it, but I think it would be good to just do a little sidebar. What changed with iOS 14 that people should know about?
Sure. The quick change with this, and everything gets lumped into iOS 14. It actually started before that. ITP 2.3 came out like 6 months before iOS 14, and that created a big issue as well from a tracking perspective. The biggest issue that I think people see from iOS 14, there's two. One is the attribution side of things. So you used to be able to get immediate feedback on what worked. So Facebook would know whether that purchase came through, and so they could take credit for that.
Right.
Apple basically delayed that, as well as limits the amount of information that's being passed through, so they can't tie as much back. So the way that I've described it to some people is, imagine if you had 10 kids and you told all 10 kids to go clean up their room, and normally 5 of them come back and say, hey, I cleaned up my room. And now you go and you inspect, and sure enough, 5 of them clean up the room. But now you say, hey, go clean up your room, and only 1 comes back and tells you that they cleaned up your room, but you go and inspect and 5 rooms are still clean. You're just getting less reported back to you. It doesn't mean that anything has changed necessarily. You're just not getting the feedback in to account for it. So that was the primary issue.
Got it.
The secondary issue is it does change some of what needs to happen within the platform. And this is where I think a lot of people have missed it, is they're not making the changes that needed to take place. And this is where we're getting to the 2 parts then. So the one part here is fixing the attribution. One of the ways that we're really talking to people about doing this is get rid of this idea of a single source of truth. It has never existed, and it will certainly never exist now. It's always going to be flawed in some way. And so you need to look at it more 3-dimensionally and understand, what is the platform saying, but also what is Shopify saying, but also what is Google Analytics saying, but also how about using post-purchase customer surveys. And so one of the articles we just published, I want to say it was about last week, we use an app called Fairing, FAIRING.co. And we found through using that Facebook was taking credit for so much less revenue. It was underreporting by about 80%.
Oh,
That's
wow.
massive. And that obviously unlocked significant growth for this company that thought that they were not doing very well, but actually were doing well and just needed to scale up. And so that's the biggest ad mistake that we see, is just not understanding which platform is working well. The other one then is, as far as not setting things up correctly, I'm sad to see that I still see this, but it's probably the biggest thing that I see for smaller companies, and even a lot of people that are working with larger agencies, is proper exclusions and inclusions from an audience perspective within your ads. You can imagine, let's say with iOS 14, they can track the data on those purchases then for up to about 7 days for most of them, but only for about 1 day. So after that, if you're not excluding people properly enough, if you're simply saying, hey, exclude people from my prospecting audience based on 180 days on the pixel or something like that, which is what we used to do. After somebody's maybe purchased 2 days ago or 8 days ago, they're all right back in your prospecting audience. And now your prospecting audience isn't actually going after net new people, it's just retargeting. And so you might be spending more money on that thinking that you're going after net new people, and you're not. And that's what we found. Almost the biggest change is literally making sure that you have the proper exclusions in there, which I'll get to in a second. All of a sudden your prospecting is really prospecting, and it's almost night and day difference in terms of what happens to the platform. And one of the best ways to do this is to make sure that you're including, from an exclusion standpoint, email addresses. And you can do this dynamically through Klaviyo as well as other programs. But also go ahead and exclude anybody that has interacted with your Facebook page or interacted with your Instagram. So now you're truly going after just net new people, and you're trying to exclude as many people that have previously engaged with your brand as possible.
And so just, so this makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm going to try to restate it maybe in a more simple way for our customers is, your prospecting is very different from your retargeting. Your prospecting is, completely brand new people. They've never heard of your brand. And if you're not careful, what you think is prospecting spend going out for new people can actually be going out to people who maybe have just purchased from you, if you're not careful in excluding them from your prospecting campaigns.
Exactly. And the reason why that makes such a big difference, because let's go to the attribution side of things. A lot of people will see in their campaigns, especially if they're a little less savvy on what's happening here. And we talked about, like, high ROAS doesn't always mean incremental revenue. Retargeting has a higher return on ad spend in platform for obvious reasons, because they've already interacted with you, right? But here's where the problem with that comes is, if you think that you're spending a higher amount on prospecting and it's actually retargeting, it's the equivalent of if you told me, hey, everybody that you get signed up for Rise, I'm going
Yeah.
to give you $10, William. And I
Right.
go to the people who are, let's say that like Rise is a coffee shop actually, and they're in
Yeah.
line at this coffee shop. And I go up to the people that are in line at the coffee shop and I say, hey, buy this coffee. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Like they're already in line. And so you're like, well, that didn't add any incremental revenue for me. But now, in addition to not adding the incremental revenue, I have to pay you $10 for every one of these people that was already going to buy anyways. So it decreases
Right.
that profit then that you made out per transaction, as
You're
opposed to
actually
going
decreasing the profit of the people that you were going to get anyway.
exactly.
So that's huge if you're trying to be kind of a data-driven business, and a ROI-driven business. If you can't kind of accurately think about what is our CAC for bringing in a genuinely new customer, and that gets kind of like muddied.
Right.
So let's move on and think a little bit more about the e-commerce business. So if a customer comes to you, like a brand new customer, and says, hey, William, I want to drive more sales through paid media, and you're going in and you're kind of looking at that e-commerce business, what are you looking for to see if they're going to be scalable? What are the prerequisites to like doing well with you?
Yep. So number one is proven product market fit. So we don't love coming in where they haven't actually proven that out yet. We're definitely much more on the data side where we want to
Is
see
that like a certain like
established.
monthly revenue number or something, or?
No, but let's say that there's at least to the point where they've tested things out. They're already getting sales, let's say organically, but they've also tested some paid media out, and they're
Yeah.
at least getting some kind of return. They might not be profitable on that return, but they're saying, look, when we show ads to people who've never heard of us, we are getting people to buy. So there's product market fit. People are looking for
Right.
what we want. The price is obviously right enough. Like we can work with that.
So
the other big thing
product
is
fit.
inventory. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and one of the other questions that we ask before we get into actually taking on a client is inventory and where they're at with that, because we've run into this before where there was a customer that wanted to double their revenue. And we were on pace to double the revenue based on the amount of spend and everything that we were doing. And things were in a really good point. They ran out of inventory. They only ordered 50% more inventory. So we didn't know that ahead of time. And so the reality here that we start to qualify is making sure that there's also good communication with whoever's making the purchasing as well. So that way, if the marketing team's got a goal to double revenue, but they've only ordered 50% more inventory, it's not going to work, and it's going to be a failed attempt. We're going to end up overspending too much with now, overspent. Now you don't have anything to sell towards the back end of something. So that's the other big thing that we're looking at.
That seems like a really key point about the inventory sort of matching the goals, especially as we head into like a high spend season where they're like, okay, we're gonna have our biggest Black Friday ever. You may ask them like, would you be ready for that?
Yeah, exactly. And I like, speaking of Black Friday, typically what we like to talk about is it's not the time to test something new. You
Right.
should have tested out whatever type of offer or creative or something that you wanted to throughout the year. And so if you're wanting to do, a percentage off, you should have, pressure tested that earlier in the year. See, how do your normal customers react? How does that impact your customer acquisition cost or CAC, right?
Right.
In any kind of a way. So you have at least a baseline gauge of that versus maybe something else. If you do like a BOGO, buy one, get one off, right? Or if you do some other type of like just a dollar amount off or whatever that offer is, you should have tested a few of those leading up to this to ideally know which one and how does that impact your overall profitability. Because again, going back to what we do is on the EBITDA side,
Yeah.
there's a lot of times where you can run this and you can destroy your profit. Your revenue could be through the roof. You can acquire a whole lot of new customers, but you look at the profit that you made that month and it's down. And we've seen this before for people too. So making sure that you understand how does that overall impact the profitability of what you're doing? How much revenue do you have to make up for to make up for the discount that you're giving and things along those lines too?
Oh, that is huge. I think that's worth sort of getting into on its own. In other words, you're making a ton of sales, but they're actually either, break even or negative. Is this something you're kind of doing in attribution reporting with the client to be like, work out like, hey, we can only pay this much for a sale, and you sort of like, you guys agree to that going in, something like that?
There's a calculator that we've built that basically works out based on different assumptions. So let's say that we work out to where we do a test of 20% off for a
Yeah.
customer. We're going to look at, well, how does that impact their customer acquisition cost, right? Let's say that reduces their customer acquisition cost by 15%. And then what about their existing customers? What kind of response rate does that have with them? What's the increase in the amount that those people are willing to buy? Does that change the average order value at all? Right. So let's say that if it's 20% off and normally your average order value is $200, and now people still get $200 worth of stuff. Let's say they still spend $200, they just got that extra there, or was it $200 minus the 20%? And so now the average order value is lower. Cost of goods is sold is still the same price there though, right? So all of those other things factor in. And so we actually run through all of those different pieces to find out where would that be ideal and how much more would you have to sell to make up for whatever that loss would be in a profit, to understand whether this is going to make sense or not. And you might find that, based on those numbers, you'd have to double your sales or something like that, right? And you say, that's a lot. I don't know if we're going to get that. And we can start using this to test these out to see what is the response to the different types of offers, and could you get to a point where you can offset that loss in revenue. Now, the one thing I want to call out here is that's just if we're talking about profit month 1 or month 0, however you want to define it. The other thing to look at is lifetime value. And this is the other big thing that I see a lot of people struggle with, is understanding, are you okay to lose money on acquiring that customer on month 0 if you know that you're going to get that paid back in the next 2 months? Then sometimes it makes sense to still do that discount. And the final nuance there, though, is to understand to acquire more new customers, right? So you acquire 25% more customers that way than you would have before. And so you're still going to get that revenue from them over the next 90 days. The one thing to call out, though, is somebody who buys from you the first time via a discount is not necessarily the same type of customer as somebody who bought from you full price. And so if you look at your cohorts, you need to make sure that you segment that out separately to find out, do you get the same kind of payback on somebody who comes to you for the first purchase with that or not? You might be banking on revenue on, let's say, your LTV as a whole, but if you don't segment that out, you might be miscalculating how much revenue you're going to get from those customers that you acquired during a big sale like Black Friday or something like that.
Okay, so that seems like a really excellent suggestion. So I really want to call that out for our listeners. If you bring in new customers with a big discount, especially on an event like Black Friday, go ahead and create a segment from them in your analytics tool, your tracking tool, so that you can actually measure their lifetime value going forward and seeing what their value is versus another customer that came in organically and didn't buy on a huge sale.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, that seems huge. Do you find that a lot of your clients are a lot of your clients going on that sort of, are they LTV focused? Or is it more that they're like, I need to be unit profitable on each sale?
Yeah, and this is which one causes which, I guess, the chicken or the egg. Most of our customers are, but that's because we maybe attract customers who are focused that way, and we only take on the customers who are thinking that way, if that makes sense. It's kind of a prerequisite before we even take somebody on, is talking through our approach and making sure that they align with it.
So most of them are LTV.
Absolutely.
Focused. Is that because they're like, maybe they just have a longer time horizon, or they're venture backed, or something you coach them into?
A little bit of both. I would say that PE and VC backing certainly makes a big difference. But I'd say that just allows for a longer length of time. Maybe you go from 1 or 2 months to 3 or 4 or 5 months, right, or whatever that number needs to be. The big thing that I'll call out there is that was true during a really good economy.
Right.
You need to look at that very differently right now, and you don't want to be as aggressive with that as you maybe would be during a really exceptionally growth economy.
Right. So we are, understanding that we're all, the dollars are maybe pulling back a little bit, and we'll be a little bit more conservative. So looking for like maybe a 3-month payback, 4-month payback versus like 5, 6, 7.
Exactly. Yep. And you have to figure out what that is based on, what your overall anticipated goals are, right? Each person. But yeah, looking at how do you adjust for that?
Looking at the spectrum of ad channels in the last couple of years, for consumer businesses, we've seen several new players come online. Maybe the biggest one has been TikTok. In the channels that, but we still have the major players of like Facebook and Google. What's working well for your clients right now?
So Facebook, absolutely still the best for acquiring new customers by far. The ad algorithm there is significantly more mature.
Mhm.
The reason why people still under invest, I think, on Facebook right now, and why it's gotten beat up so much, is because of all of the iOS 14 stuff and things like that. And so people weren't tracking as much, and so they just saw what they thought was lost revenue, which wasn't. And we talked about the ROAS death spiral, which is
Right.
an article that we've got on our blog, which walks people through what actually happened. Again, if you
This
look
is a
also
great
there,
article, by the way. I just want to call that out for
thank
our
you.
listeners. Check that out. Yeah.
It is a long one. It is 7,000 words. Fair warning to those who do go down that path, but it is very in depth. And so there's usually Facebook's performing significantly better than people realize it's performing. So if they can get to the point where they understand attribution better, it is still the best one and the most mature and the most stable of all of the ones that you're looking at for that. Google Ads is by far the best for capturing existing demand. So those two, if you're only going to do two, those are still the ones that we 100% recommend scaling. They have the most stability. You actually can scale and have reliability. Between that, though, YouTube and TikTok are my tied for third place because they're both doing very well. YouTube, both of them, the interesting thing is they both need very different content than what you're used to producing. YouTube, you do need a lot different content than what you're putting on Facebook. And TikTok, it's very different. TikTok content works great on Facebook ads, not the flip, not the reverse. You can't take what you're doing on Facebook, throw it on TikTok, and expect much out of it. It won't perform very well. And so that's why I think a lot of people have seen a lot of problems with TikTok. It's shiny, it's exciting. They test it out. They don't get the performance they want because they don't have the right content. And the biggest thing there is recognizing that you probably don't know what is good content there. You need to just work with somebody who does. And usually it's going to look really bad to you, and you have to get over it from a brand standards kind of perspective, and just say, okay, I trust you. Let's get this in here and let's see what happens. Because it usually looks horrible in my opinion, but that's because I didn't grow up with TikTok.
It's a very, so it's something to maybe like experiment with and understand that the creative is going to be probably amateurish compared to what you'd see on Facebook. Let me ask you for your hot take on a couple of channels, because I think this will be fun.
Go for it.
Spotify.
Okay, so I do like Spotify. One of the things that I like about it is that it's like auditory type content as well, right? And I think that we miss out on how impactful audio can be. That said, if you're not quite at the point where you're ready to invest into Spotify or other programmatic channels, which was I had number 4 on my list, so I'm glad that you got to this. If you're not there, YouTube has YouTube Radio. So if you're already on Google, you can get on YouTube Radio and you can at least start testing out a concept of radio without having to necessarily say, wait, how do we get into programmatic? And that's just a way to say, well, how about let's test some audio type ads? I think it's a great thing to add. It won't perform as well from a direct response perspective. And so what we usually say is, before you start getting into, let's say, a lot of the other programmatic platforms, I like to see brands spending at least $100,000 a month, if not $250,000 a month on the other platforms. Get to a point where you've plateaued there and you're saying, all right, let's go to what's next and what's incremental here.
Okay, got it. So that sort of answers my question. Would that include programmatic too? Like get to 100, 200K on Facebook and Google before? And for our listeners who don't know, programmatic is just sort of the new name for display ads. So get to like 100, 200K in advertising there before kind of messing with the display world.
Yeah, not always, but most of the time, yes. And the reason why is because those other two are so tuned into. So all right, and here's why, if I've got a couple more minutes to go over this,
Yeah.
here's why this makes such a big difference. You have to think about all of the websites that have the Facebook pixel and the Google pixel installed on them from a tracking perspective. Think
Oh, yeah.
about how many years they've been collecting data on literally just about every single website that exists on the planet. Think
Right.
about how they have used that to understand people's behaviors in such a big way. They still do the best at driving those results. And then if you get into, let's say, Facebook and TikTok, as opposed to programmatic, from a direct response perspective, if you see an ad on either one of these platforms, they take up your whole screen. You can't
Right.
help but see, you have to move past it. In programmatic, and I'm sure you've experienced this in a lot of programmatic, in a lot of display type ads, you can be served 50 different impressions on the same page without but it's in your periphery, right? That's
Right.
still good. It's still, but it's not necessarily usually going to have as good of a direct response impact. And so if you're saying, I need direct response right now because we're spending under $100,000, then you probably need like more immediate impact from your dollars. You're not at the point where you say, hey, I need to broaden my expanse and my reach there. That's not to say that programmatic does not have its place where it can do better, but it's seldom and it's rare. Usually in those cases, it's when you're struggling to even get anything going well on one of the social channels because you're in a touchy subject like, CBD or crypto
Botox or something. Yeah.
something else where you're like, it's a lot easier to go there. And they have some dedicated programmatic partners that are really good at having already the best spots and placements on some of those, unique channels. So.
Okay. One more hot take. Twitter.
Okay. I'm indifferent on Twitter right now, and I'll say
Okay.
that I don't know. We haven't found anything amazing. We don't have any runaway success on Twitter, but I'd say that I'd almost lump it in with the programmatic, where it is still a
Yeah.
very good channel to use. There are some different targeting options you can do on Twitter that you can't do elsewhere that I think just make it interesting. I think it can be, let's throw that in with programmatic, and let's throw that in with Microsoft ads, meaning
Yeah.
it is a good channel to add on when you've kind of plateaued on some of the other channels and you want to reach a little bit differently in a little different way. The creative that you need there doesn't need to be dynamic in some way where it's like, look, if you're not a very creative focused company, like TikTok is hard, but you can throw some stuff on Twitter and get some decent performance without having to create like wildly new creative.
Okay. So like lukewarm. I personally, I'm not optimistic given recent events. So I'll leave that there. I always love to ask founders, especially after they've been in the trenches for a while, about some of their war stories, where they've just really killed it, to get a chance to kind of show off and tell you about like some of the best work you've done. Are there any great war stories you have that you'd like to share with us today?
There are two that come to mind. Recently, there was a client that just came to us, and without changing any of their creative, well, and I'll even say this is a client that they were our client for about maybe 3 years or so. They got a consultant to come in, and the consultant felt that we were too expensive of an agency, and that they wanted to go with a different agency. That lasted 2 months, and then they were back, and without changing any of the creative, without changing any of the budget, the only thing that we did differently was we set up things within the campaigns correctly. What we would say is like the boring technical stuff that everybody else seems to say doesn't matter, just let Facebook do it all for you. They went from, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but something about like a 2x MER or ROAS, if you would, to a 5x MER or ROAS, literally the same day. It sustained. And the only thing that was different was just the technical stuff that we set up. So
Now,
that's one that I really like.
Because they do say, I think the party line from Facebook is, we have machine learning, just give us a box with all your creative and we'll take it from there. Is that how you guys respond? Is that sort of the approach, you take, or you like sort of against it?
Facebook is brilliant. And this is why we still say that it's the best for going after this. But Facebook is limited. Now, there are ways you can make it a little bit less limited, but they're limited in what they know about the business. So here's a couple of examples. Let's say that we decide that, and this is a really dumb example, but let's just say that we decide that on average, people named Russell end up spending 3 times more within the first 90 days than people named William. I'm going to target a whole lot of people named Russell then, because even if it costs more for me to acquire Russell than it does for me to acquire a William, I'm going to get more overall revenues in a pretty significant way. That's going to impact my profit a lot more. The problem is that Facebook doesn't know the difference between that. So you optimize it for a purchase, and it's just going to go for the lowest cost purchase. And maybe you can acquire William purchase for $5 less than a Russell purchase, but the amount that you're going to make from Russell, exactly. So that's why I say that, like, it's really good. Facebook is really good if you set it up correctly. And I think that most people they're lacking that understanding of like the nuanced things we talked about there, from like really making sure that it's actually prospecting. But then Facebook just doesn't know what it doesn't know yet. But there's ways to feed it a lot more of that information, which we do. We do this on Google too, where we're actually feeding Google profit per product and stuff along those lines. So it's a much better, we're enabling the algorithms that are very powerful to use better data to optimize around what we actually want.
So it sounds like, for this customer you helped out, one of the things you brought in was really technical setup, and also maybe, using their first party data, to really figure out an edge and like who to target. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yep. The other war story then is when we just published this one on our blog. There's a $50 million Shopify store. They were seeing a massive decline in customer growth year over year. And we noticed that this was actually related to, again, a poor understanding of the boring technical stuff. So I want to say that they were down there because of the size. They were down 9% customers year over year, month over month over month. I want to say it was like maybe 4 or 5 months in a row prior to coming to us. Within 1 month, when we flipped on our campaigns, again, no new creative, no new budget. This was just flipping things around. Actually, I think there may have been a little bit more budget at this point in time, just as we were ramping up for them throughout the course of the month. Increased the new customers by 29% year over year. So this was they were having a really good downtrend, and we were able to flip that around. And then when you look at, I don't know if you're familiar with Veros. Veros is a really nice benchmarking company that we've been really enjoying using. It is Y Combinator backed, and they have performance lines where they're looking at quartiles. So they're going to bring in a bunch of other Shopify stores, and instead of it just being irrelevant benchmarks, which I'm very much against, they try to get a lot more relevant. So they'll say, okay, how about companies that are within the kids and babies vertical space that are apparel, that are spending $100,000 a month at least, that have an average order value of XYZ. So now it's a much more relevant benchmark. And within this benchmark data, they're looking at the quartiles, the bottom, the median, the top quartile, and then you, right? So there's a line for you. We actually destroyed their chart with this customer because there's the bottom quartile, the median, the top quartile, and then us. And so we're so far beyond that you almost can't even see the detail of the other 3 lines that are in there. ROAS of 6.28 compared to the benchmark of 1.48 over this. And so I think it's, again, that was another good war story of this was a significant difference, and it's almost overnight.
And is this when you said like paying attention to the boring technical stuff, when you came into this account, what were you seeing? Like it was just set up as sort of one undifferentiated blob campaign? Or,
no, it was set up very well. I would say that the company that was doing this, not negligent, if that makes sense. Companies, I think they were absolutely doing a good job, and was set up with what you would say is best practice if you follow all the Twitter threads. But this comes down to, again, I think the majority of people out there, and actually the Veros founder said this to us when he asked, what are you guys doing that's so different from everybody else? And I explained some of these concepts to him. He said, that's interesting. You're the only one that said that. Everybody else has said that it's about the creative. And so I think that it's just that there's maybe just a lack of looking deeper at the setup and how impactful it can be. And again, going back to those exclusions, it makes a big difference. Another thing that we really push for is instead of allowing the algorithm, you can tell it to optimize around a 7-day click, 1-day view. We force it to only optimize around the 7-day click. The benefit there is you're saying to Facebook, you're saying, I will not let you take credit for it unless you cause that person to click and convert that person. Now, the downside to that, and I think why some people end up not doing that, is because they want more data to flow through, right?
Right.
They want, well, I want more purchases so that way the algorithm can get smarter. The problem with that, though, is that you're allowing too many view-through conversions that Facebook didn't necessarily cause. You're allowing that data into it. So now you just have, let's say, diluted data instead of very specific, intentional, incremental data. So we still use the view-throughs in reporting to understand how that's happening. You're still going to get more view-throughs when you force it to go after the people that are going to click and convert. The difference is you've just forced the algorithm to have to work a little harder to find those right people.
So you're so for our listeners, you're actually there's sort of broadly two ways of tracking ads. Does someone see an ad? That's called an impression, or does someone actually click on an ad? So that's a click through. Facebook has a initial optimization window of, well, we can do a click or a view within 7 days, but those are not the same, right? A click is a very intentional sort of thing, whereas a view through, they may or may not have seen the ad. And so if you're just focusing on the click through, it's arguably better data.
Yeah, exactly. And so by doing things like that, and that's just, two of the few things we mentioned about
Right.
sending through, profit into Google. There's just a number of things that we're doing from a technical side of things that I think it's easy for people to overlook and just say, oh, your creative's just not good enough, which is also always true. So we don't disagree with that. We're just saying that doesn't have to be the only thing that you go to. There's a lot that could be done without the new creative. And then if you also had good new creative on top of that, it's exceptional.
So maybe the lesson there is, creative because it's visible, is what people usually reach for because it's sort of obvious. But there are a lot of, subtle things to look for in the setup that it can actually drive returns a lot more that people can dig into.
Yeah, well said.
So I wanted to also, we're sort of on the down end. We have like 10, 15 minutes left. What element, you guys are primarily focused on advertising. Does email or email capture or email retargeting, how do you think about that in terms of like your overall ad profitability and ad ROAS? How does that play in?
So I got another hot take on this one.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's okay, right?
Sure.
The contrarian point of view. There's several things that I like about it and several things I strongly dislike about it. The one that I really don't like is I'm not a big fan of from an ad perspective, sending people to, and I've seen people do this and even suggest this, clients suggest it too, right? Of, hey, let's optimize for an email capture from an advertising perspective. Now, again, I'm talking about e-commerce. I'd say optimizing for an email capture if you're doing lead gen, 100%. But we're talking e-commerce, more often than not, you're going to be better off just optimizing for the person that is going to actually buy. And part of this comes down to, if you think about like those fish bowls that you sometimes see at a place where it's like, hey, drop your business card in to win an iPad. How relevant are the majority of those business cards in there for that business? It's very few of those are actually interested in whatever that product is that company is selling that has the fish bowl out there. The same thing happens if you optimize for just email capture from an ad perspective. You end up with a lot of emails that are not even remotely qualified buyers. Maybe don't even buy things online at all, which is part of what the algorithm is doing when you say optimize for purchase. It's looking at it saying, hey, my mom, Deanna, she doesn't buy anything online ever. So I'm not going to optimize for her, but she might throw her email into something, right? So, okay, great. You said, well, she's got zero chance of becoming your customer. So I'm not a big fan of doing it from that perspective. I am a big fan of doing email capture when you say you've got somebody to the website,
Yeah.
and they didn't purchase and they're about to leave, exit prompt, I'm absolutely in favor of. They're about to leave, and there's a good chance you might not see them back there. There's a lot of benefit to that. The biggest thing that I would say, though, is in
Mhm.
all of these situations, these are different email addresses than your customer email address list. And I see too many people who do their emails where they will send them and they will lump them all together in a lot of the things that they're doing instead of segmenting out those. And you have to remember that if your email list is currently, let's say, 100% customers, and then all
Mhm.
of a sudden, after doing a lot of this stuff, your email list is 50% people who have bought from you before and 50% people who haven't, and you
Right.
treat them as one same list, your deliverability is going to go down because you've got less people that are interested. They're not as interested as the people who have bought from you before. Your
Right.
click-through rates go down. It can absolutely ruin your ability to actually reach your customers who have bought from you before too. So
So you definitely
when
want to
people,
segment those out. You want to
yes,
have like
yep.
your list of your customer list of people who've actually purchased from you. Maintain that as a separate list versus people who have entered their email into a pop-up because they landed on your website somehow.
Same thing that we do on the ad side. Look at it as
Yeah.
two different funnels. There's
Mhm.
like a circle or a cyclone almost, if you would, of like
Yeah.
awareness, consideration, decision, up until they make a purchase. Once they do, they're in a completely different set of things, and the same thing from an email perspective.
Uh, I wanted to ask about kind of the biggest change in the past year or so. And this is just, you know, could be a trend, something that you've seen in e-commerce or something you've seen in kind of, the broader macro economy and, how kind of you help your customers deal with it.
Yeah, and I think we touched on this a little bit before,
Yeah.
which I would like to say that we're done with iOS 14 issues,
Yeah.
but at least 70% of the accounts that we take on haven't been set up properly, and so that's still a big issue. But the biggest change
Yeah.
is obviously the macro economy, and so let's say the almost inevitable recession that we're heading into, and this has reduced a lot of just overall buyer demand in a number of places. Now we've got plenty of clients that are still up year over year.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of, especially if you're a bigger client, if you're a bigger customer, if you already have a significant market share, you end up just kind of riding the wave a little bit of the overall market demand. There's less market capitalization that you can do, right? And so for some bigger customers, one of the big things we're looking at, and for smaller ones who are maybe experiencing this too, is really trying to think through what is their overall, again, EBITDA growth goal for this year.
Mhm.
And let's say that there's X amount of inventory. Maybe they already ordered inventory ahead of time before coming to us, thinking that this was going to be a bigger year than 2021 for them, but they have been down every single month, year over year, or they're not growing the way they thought they were. Now it becomes more of a conversation about how do we adjust to maximize the EBITDA you have with the products with the inventory you have on hand. And one of these is you can advertise more aggressively to sell more product, to move more product, which is good from a cash flow perspective. And
Mhm.
there are some clients that opt for that route where they say, look, we're going to go ahead and discount stuff. We'll take that hit on that side because we need the cash flow. Or you say, no, we want to focus on EBITDA. It's okay if we don't sell as high a volume of products. We still want to focus on just making sure that we're profitable on what we do sell. So the biggest change, I think, is just looking at that with clients and helping them to understand and forecast better with everything that's been going on.
So it sounds like having really, given that we're heading into a recession, having an honest conversation with your clients about what their goals are and what their trade-offs are. They going for, new customer acquisition, or is it really more about, profit per sale, and being very clear on that, and then being very clear on matching the demand generation side with, what the actual inventory is. Even now, 2 years post-pandemic, we're still working through a lot of China supply chain issues, probably for a lot of your clients, and the demand that you're able to achieve for them may not match the inventory they can actually get.
Yeah, and a good way to think about some of this too is really like going to Google Trends and just seeing demand for, like, let's just say like big giant things
Mhm.
overall. So if it's, let's say that it's coffee, that it's just like just literally just typing in coffee versus like something
Right.
very specific, right? Like what's the overall demand for people searching for coffee? Um,
Mhm.
and let's just imagine that the demand is down. If you look at, let's say, November versus November this year for people searching for coffee, and I didn't look this one up ahead of time, so I
Right.
don't know, but let's just say that it's down 40% year over year in the
Mhm.
number of people searching for it. Well, let's say that last year you were in a growth mode. So you were being aggressive. You were already working towards, let's say, lifetime value. So you were going for the highest CAC possible as you were trying to really push and go after everything you could, right? You were willing to be aggressive on that. And let's say that now, if you want to still achieve that same amount, you can still take it, but you're taking market share from somebody else. But the overall demand has gone down for that. Even if you're still relatively small, if you are already maxed at your efficiency level, then you have to understand that, like, continuing to grow while the market demand is going down means that you're going to have resistance. Even if you're small, there's still resistance against where you were. So if you were seeing, let's say, a CAC of $20, if
Mhm.
you want to grow, you might see in everything, the demand is down, you might see a CAC of $25. And you have to determine, is that worth it for you at this point in time or not? Or is it worth it for you to instead to kind of stay the course, pull back, maybe just go for a CAC of, $18 or something along those lines? And if you do, how much lower overall revenue does that make for you? Because the other thing to remember is overhead. And
Yeah.
so if this impacts your overhead, where you say, I actually need X amounts of sales, and that's where we kind of just work with customers to help them do a better job of just kind of helping them navigate through all of that. Like, where is the sweet spot?
Yeah. So really taking a holistic view, so that if demand is shrinking, we might have to fight much harder for that incremental growth because there's just less pie to go around, and
Exactly.
are we willing to increase our CAC to go after it? Or maybe we say, oh, you know what, beyond a certain level, it's not worth it for us. So understanding what those drivers are for the company, and you and Elumynt are kind of helping, steer your client to kind of make those trade-offs.
Exactly. To at least help open up those conversations. So that way, oh, you're right. Like, what, it's two ends of the same string. Which direction do you want to pull it?
Yeah,
And
I
we can help
think
support either goal.
um, the stupid version of that I saw was that people thinking that the sales from 2021 were not a windfall and were just like a new normal, and that would and
Sure.
that would continue. Um, this has been really fantastic. I wanted to end with just asking you for a little bit about your backstory and the backstory of Elumynt, because it is super exciting to become on these Inc. 500 lists and one of the top agencies in Minnesota. What's sort of the growth story there?
All right, best for last, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
There's a really long version of this that starts
Yeah.
with the rock band that I was in during high school. But as we fast forward some interesting career moves,
Yeah.
I was actually leading growth for a fun VC-backed SaaS company
Mhm.
called When I Work. There's amazing founder there, Chad Halverson. I got to shake Alan Patrikoff's hand a few times. If you don't know Alan Patrikoff, for the audience there, he's like the godfather of VC, like just a really cool, old dude now. But it was a big deal for me, right? Um,
Mhm.
and basically, with the help of our entire team there, we were able to grow When I Worked that company by about 270% in the first
Wow.
7 months that I came on board. So exceptional growth. Ended up getting poached by a really interesting RC car and drone company website called Dollar Hobbies, and they were crushing it. And we expanded them from, I want to say, about 3,000 products to 70,000 products in the course of a year. And that was my entry into e-commerce. Um, and so I remember applying a lot of the same concepts that we used in SaaS into e-commerce. And I was surprised that more people weren't approaching e-commerce this way. But keeping this as short as possible, fast forward a little more, and I start writing about this stuff that we're doing on different
Mhm.
blogs like Entrepreneur, Fast Company, etc. And before long, I had a lot of people just reaching out saying, "Hey, I like what you're talking about. Can you grow my business too?" And that's when I launched the agency. And at the time, I didn't think
Mhm.
agencies needed to be disrupted. I had never worked at an agency, but I quickly found out that most of the talent at typical agencies didn't understand the deeper aspects of business. They were looking at things like ROAS instead of profit. And while it seems like it would be the same, obviously I can assure you that it's very possible to increase the
Right.
reported return on ad spend without increasing the EBITDA. Finance team sees that, et cetera. So it wasn't the agency's fault, though. Most of the marketing teams at companies, they just don't know what profit looked like at their company because they weren't even privy to the P&Ls. So anyway, so we go through this, and that's kind of what started down this path of, okay, how do we continue to find an agency that can operate around what the business's actual goals are? And that's kind of what started the successful launch of this, where all of our growth has been through referrals, and a little bit of content marketing through things like being on a podcast or writing an entrepreneur. But this is just doing really great work, and people saying, wow, you guys get it differently than the people we've talked to before.
I think having that business mindset is, really huge, and yeah, really a differentiator. I think there's a lot of agency people are kind of like, they see the Facebook dashboard and that's sort of as far as it goes. So that is, I think, a really interesting point of differentiation for you guys in Elumynt. So we will wrap it there. I want to thank our guest, William Harris of Elumynt, super fast, high growth e-commerce agency. If you need to blow your sales out, these are really good guys to talk to. So thank you so much, William.
Thanks, Russell.
Thanks for tuning in. This has been the Heroes of Ecommerce podcast, brought to you by Ryzeo, a proven email system that's made millions for e-commerce sites. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. For even more insights, visit our website at ryzeo.com, where we share resources on email marketing that grows sales. Until next time, happy marketing.